Hello everyone! In our previous lesson, we touched upon the four different passage types and how we broke them down into two categories, the fictional and the non-fictional. We learned how the non-fictional tones tend to be more controlled and that there are certain things we can and cannot say. Just remember, if the topic is purely a general narrative, we can speak more extreme on the topic, such as television, voting, shopping, a personal story, anything from the news that's very general, or let's say diving. Since these topics are relatively general, we can say such things like, television is stupid. My trip last weekend with my uncle was very boring. I hate how the news seems to exaggerate real events. We also learned that whenever we're presented with a double passage on either the critical reading or science conflicting viewpoints, we need to understand that there will be a two roads diverge type relationship between the two passages, and never a two trains kind of crashing in the middle of the night mentality. So now that we've identified the tone of passage A, that it's a little negative from the last sentence here, I don't really understand why it would be so great to be a man on the moon, exiled, in orbit, so far away from home. We're ready to tackle the questions for passage A first. So why do we always proceed according to this sequence?
It's pretty obvious, so we don't get the two stories intermingled.
I know as an ex-test writer, I would place one of the main ideas from passage B into some of the questions for passage A, just to throw students off. So now that we know to read passage A first, I usually apply a superscope for medium, shorter comparing passages. The reason I scope at a much faster rate for shorter, multiple author passages is simply because these passages love to focus on big picture and comparing questions, such as main idea, title, theme, or tone or attitude. And when there's no big picture items, there's occasionally a specific detail or one-off question like that. In addition, I also notice that passage A contains a lot of I's, which indicates it's a narrative and possibly is more extreme in its tone than, say, a social science passage about, say, Thomas Jefferson. That will be more controlled. So why don't we begin? 1969, running around. Something momentous is about to happen. The first man to walk on the moon. Definitely a positive tone. We're going to see it. He's emerging from the metal door, and then the quote, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," appears. The guy hops around the moon. Next, everyone's quiet, and boom, if I read quickly, I've ruined it. A shift or a turn into a more negative tone. I don't know why I did it. An obvious continuation of the negative. And we all know how this ends. Confused and not sure why a person would want to be so far away from home. So now taking a look at question 1. The last paragraph of passage A, lines 37 through 49, marks a shift in the passage from, what do you think is the answer now that we superscoped? I'll give you a few seconds. Did you get A as the answer? The first 3 paragraphs were simply describing an event that led to a negative moment in the end. B ends positively. Solved is out. C's tone sounds rather neutral, and D does the same. Only A discusses the events leading up to this last moment and reflection as to how I ruined the dinner. Now moving on to question 2. How does the author view Armstrong? Remember where I told you the main idea is located?
In the end.
And which answer looks like exiled, so far away from home?
G. Isolated and alone.
See how easy that was when we know where to look? Question 3. The narrator of A suggests they are annoyed with the fork thingy is why? What reason? Well, I know that this question doesn't tell me which line to look at, but I simply have to look for the word fork, which is right here. Line 28, forks in midair. My family saying, well, thank you very much, sarcastically and obviously means that they were angry with my interruption. B. Most students will choose between B and D because the answers look similar, as we like to call scope and slope answers. Scope being the correct answer and slope being the trap answer. But because the question states suggest, we should look for something a little less obvious than D. I mean, D is true. The character did drown out the noise and make the family annoyed, but the suggested answer will add a layer of suggestion on top of that. B is better. And now that we're finished with all the questions that just pertain to Passage A, we're ready to superscope Passage B as quickly as possible in our next lesson.